got to get my gavel. Welcome, everybody, to the Southern Region Advisory Council. We are here in Cedar City, Utah at SUU campus. It is 6 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, and we are ready to get started. Reminder, this meeting is being streamed live on YouTube, and this meeting is a public forum that allows you to express your opinions and ideas on wildlife management. This RAC is a full, pretty close to full RAC tonight. We'll consider your opinions and pass on our feedback to the Wildlife Board, and the Wildlife Board will be setting the wildlife policy. The statement they would like me to read, we all have ideas and opinions about what is best for Utah's wildlife. It's why we're here. We encourage all those who want to participate to fill out a comment card. We have those in the back. You can pass them to one of the DWR officials and they'll bring them up here to us. Comments at today's meeting should be focused on the topics listed in the agenda. Unrelated comments will not be heard today, and they can be sent later to the DWR or the board for consideration another time. We expect all those who are in attendance to speak politely, especially those who don't hold views that align with others. Respectful behavior facilitates efficient meetings where RAC members can listen, digest, and address the concerns. Disrespectful behavior will not be tolerated, and we will ask you to leave. Please help reduce distractions by putting your phone on silent. If you need to take a call, you can step outside here. There's a hallway, bathrooms, and a drinking fountain there as well. So with that being said, I'd like to welcome all the RAC members tonight. It's been a little while since we've been together, so I appreciate everybody coming out. Let's go ahead with some introductions. If you can tell us your full name, where you're from, and which group you represent on the Southern Region RAC. We'll start down here with Chuck at the end.
I turn it off. I'm Chuck Chamberlain with the Forest Service out of Cedar City.
So I'm Rachel Bolus. I represent Watchable Wildlife, and I'm from Cedar City.
I'm Chris Cannon. I live in St. George, and I represent Sportsman.
I'm Trevor Barnson. I live in Junction, and I represent Ag.
Russ Gardner. I live in Enterprise. I represent Farm Bureau.
Bryant Johnson, Monroe, Utah, and I represent Public at Large.
We on now? Chad Utley, Public at Large, St. George.
Hi, I'm Brooklyn Cox. I'm from the BLM in Cedar City.
Perfect. And Bart?
Bart Batista, Watchable Wildlife. I'm in Kanab, Utah.
Perfect. My name is Austin Atkinson. I'm the chair of this Southern Region Council, and we have a new regional supervisor here. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Dax Mangus. I was formerly the big game coordinator with Division of Wildlife. Just a couple months ago, took the position as regional supervisor here in Cedar City. So I guess I'm the new secretary for the RAC. Happy to be here.
We'll put you to work. All right, and we welcome all DWR staff that's here tonight. Appreciate you being here and helping us get online. We'd like to recognize a few Wildlife Board members in attendance. I believe they are all online tonight. We have board members Bob Christensen, Paula Richmond, and Justin Oliver, and Gary Nielsen. Appreciate all of you. I think I got them all. Yeah, we appreciate you joining in and listening to the fabulous Southern Region RAC meeting tonight. So we welcome all the public that's attending tonight or watching later on YouTube. If you're here in person, we'll take your public comments at the microphone here in the middle. You just have to submit a green comment card. Please write in which agenda item. If there's multiple, you can submit multiple, but we will call you up for that agenda item at that time. The public watching on YouTube will not be able to provide live comments. They have submitted them to us beforehand, and they will be able to provide comments at the Wildlife Board meeting if they so desire. The presentations from DWR staff will not be provided in person tonight. They were provided online previously, and I hope everybody got to watch those, both RAC members and members of the public. So, okay, moving on. Need to approve minutes from our last meeting in December and approve the agenda for this evening. Entertain a motion on that from any RAC member if there's any discussion needed. Trevor makes a motion to approve the agenda and the minutes. Do I have a second? Bryant?
Second.
Motion by Trevor, second by Bryant. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye, please. All those opposed? Bart, you were in favor, is that correct?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, agenda and minutes are approved. Moving along the agenda, we will not have a regional update tonight and to keep us on time and keep us on schedule, right? Your regional update is Dax is here. Wildlife Board meeting update. So last Wildlife Board meeting, January 8th. I'll give a report from that. There was a few motions made. The first one passed unanimously to ask the division to look at separating the bobcat license from the fur bearer requirements, and that passed. Second motion was in regards to black bear recommendations. The motion was made to accept the division's proposal with the new unit and the additional 10 tags that was over on the LaSalle Dolores Triangle unit, I believe. And that passed 5-1. The predator control incentive amendments, the motion there was to accept the amendments in R657-64 as presented, and that also passed unanimously. And the last motion, second to last, was to accept the cooperative agreements for big game or turkey rule changes as presented by the division with the addition of an annual report to the board. And that passed unanimously. Then there was a board appeal motion that passed unanimously. You can look into the Wildlife Board meeting for more information on that. Any questions on the Wildlife Board meeting? Updates? Okay. I guess we'll move right along. No regional update. We will have first agenda item number 4, informational. So there will not be an action taken on this, but this is the big game informational presentation with our new big game program coordinator, Mr. Mike Wardle. Welcome to the party.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
That's good. Mike, would you like to share any information on this informational item?
The only information, it was all laid out in the presentation. The only reminder is that these were the permit adjustments that are below a 20% change from the prior year. That's why they were presented as an informational and not an action item.
Mike, can you refresh the RAC members that aren't used to this new process yet? Which species that applies to or types of permits, the 20% automatic?
Yep. So it just applies to deer. And it does apply to limited entry, premium limited entry, and general season deer permits, buck deer permits. So if we had 1,000 permits last year and we recommend 1,100 permits and it's under that 20% change threshold, it just happens automatically. If it's above that 20%, then it still comes to the regional advisory councils for input and requires approval from the board. And that was because of the statewide mule deer plan where that was changed.
Any questions for Mike or other staff on this informational item? I believe on the informational item, I do not take public comment. Does that jive with what everybody says? I guess we could ask for questions from the public.
I believe we asked for questions in the other racks. That's it.
Any questions from the public? All right, seeing none, we will say thank you and move on to the next agenda item. Okay, agenda item number 5. This is an action item with Mike again, our big game program coordinator, and this is deer permit recommendations for 2026. Knowing that in agenda item 5, you pulled out everything that was within the 20% threshold. So this is the remainder.
Correct. Yep.
Correct.
This is the stuff that's over that 20% change.
Right. Any information before we open it for questions?
Nope.
Questions from the RAC to Mike about deer permit recommendations. This would be all types of deer permits, but it would be for just the ones we can change. Correct. Yep. Questions for Mike? Mike, I think this is a good time to bring up Fillmore Oak Creek. That falls within the 20%. Is that accurate?
It does, yep. was
That
under
would
the
not
20%.
be on agenda item number 5.
Correct, that was in agenda item 4.
So we did have some comments come in about that, asking how that's set. How do we make changes to those permit numbers? I want to hear it from you that we can't change them.
Yeah, so those are within that 20% change from the previous year. So they don't come here as an action items. Those are informational. I can explain a little bit about what our biologists are looking at as they set those permits, some of the data. And on the Central Region RAC, there was a lot of questions about what type of data, because oftentimes you guys are just seeing the buck-doe ratios in the presentation. If you'd like me to, Mr. Chair, I can go over that and I'll try to be brief.
Yeah, I think that would be beneficial for both the public and for the RAC members to understand why increases or decreases for all deer units. This is the magic sauce you use, correct?
Yeah, yep, this is the magic sauce. So the data inputs that we're looking at, the first one is herd composition. So this is gained during the months of November and December. Our biologists are out in the mornings and evenings, and they are trying to understand what the composition of the deer population is. So that means what's the buck-doe ratio, what's the fawn-doe ratio. Those are terms you're familiar with, you hear a lot. I like to think of it as like a pie graph, right? If your pie graph is your herd, you want to know what percentage is bucks, how many of those are does, how many of those are fawns. That's done in November and December because the bucks are there with the does. They're not sexually segregated, and they're more condensed they're more concentrated on the winter range, so they're easier to count and get samples. Now, the second piece of information we'd look at is survival data. And we capture a lot of deer every year throughout the state. We put GPS collars on these animals. Those collars allow us to monitor them from December to December. And we're looking at what percentage of those adult does survive and what percentage don't. And that's a major piece of information, and it really is the main metric that's going to drive our deer populations up and down, is that adult doe survival. We also catch 6-month-old fawns. So again, fawns are born in June. When they're 6 months old, around December, we go capture some of them, put collars on them, and monitor their survival for the next year. The other piece of information we're looking at is harvest data. So if you've been hunting, you've had the wonderful opportunity to fill out a harvest survey report. That information all comes back to our biologists. So they will know, okay, if I issue 1,000 tags, that doesn't mean 1,000 dead bucks, right? It doesn't mean 1,000 harvested bucks. Only a percentage of those are actually going to be harvested. And that's where we get that information from, is the harvest report. So all that information goes into a population model. The model, you can think of it, I think Dax used this analogy and I love it, of if you go to a gas station and you buy a $4 Red Bull and a $2 candy bar, and you come out and you have $14 left, you can work backwards and say, okay, my $4 Red Bull plus my $2 candy bar plus my 14 bucks, I probably had $20 before I walked in the gas station. That's a real simplified way of thinking about it, but that's kind of how a model works. And we're using the information that we know in order to estimate the information we don't know, which is the population estimate. From there, we break it out into figuring out how many bucks we have, how many does, how many fawns, and then we look at, okay, this is my buck-doe ratio. Let's say it's 18 bucks per 100 does. We have management objectives that are set in a statewide management plan. One of those objectives is the buck-doe ratio objective. So our biologists look and say, okay, if I'm at 18 and I'm supposed to be at 15 to 17, how many bucks do I need to harvest the following year in order to move my population towards that objective? And then they apply the harvest data to the number of permits that they're going to recommend, and we can actually predict forward what our adult doe survival and fawn survival is going to be, so that we can estimate where our buck-doe ratio is going to be after the hunt. Follow? It's a lot of information I know I'm throwing at you, but the big key is that we're to a point with our data that we're able to look forward. We're using the data we have to look forward and say, if I issue this many permits, my buck-doe ratio is likely to be within this range after the hunt. And that's the objective that we're aiming towards. And so that's all of these permit recommendations that you see. That's one of the main driving factors, is our biologists are saying, I'm here with my buck-doe ratio. this is the objective. These are the number of permits I need to get to that objective.
Thanks for that insight, Mike. When a biologist in an area recommends a unit or a permit number, a number of permits for a specific, say, general season deer, can he be overridden by Salt Lake? Is that you? What does that look like? Is there a think tank, or is it what the biologist says gets printed?
Yeah, it gets a lot of eyes on it. So typically the biologist is the first person that's going to make that recommendation, and it's going to get a regional review from the regional manager and the regional supervisor. And their role in the process is really making sure that we're actually aiming towards our objectives, right? This is within the statewide management plan and the unit management plan. And then it's going to come to Salt Lake, where it gets reviewed by folks like myself, the big game coordinator, and we have a lot of help from like our biometrician, our big game projects leader, and we will review all these recommendations as well. And there are times where we'll call a biologist and say, hey, explain this to me, because from the outside looking in, it doesn't look like you're going to get to your objective. And we have that back and forth. But for, I'll say 99% of these, the biologists know better than I do sitting in a Salt Lake office. So that's usually what we're going with.
Another question, the Beaver West. So last year we split the Beaver East and the Beaver West for general season deer. Do we have separate data to go off of? Because we modeled Beaver West as kind of off of Beaver, knowing that they're very separate and distinct populations. Do we have anything to go off of, and why the increase this year?
Yeah, we're getting there with data. We have 1 year of harvest data. So normally before, harvest data was collected at the Beaver scale, not the Beaver East and the Beaver West scale. Now we are collecting at that Beaver East and Beaver West scale. So we do have 1 year of data. And then our buck-doe ratios, our fawn-doe ratios, the classification data, that is also being collected at those smaller scales. And we do have survival information there. We put out some more collars there. And yeah, we're getting there, but models are better with time, right? So our population estimate now is still pretty fresh, I think, but it's going to get better with time.
Another question, the mule deer plan review, when does that come up?
That is
Mid-plan review, I guess.
I think next summer, Dax, does that sound right? It was in 2024 was.
It's a 6-year plan. This is year 2. They're making recommendations for year 2 of the 6-year plan. So
yeah,
maybe the summer after.
Yeah.
Okay. That got brought up a few times. And my last question is on Ponsonnet management. You're putting a bunch more tags in there, recommending them. Are we running out of management bucks, or do we think we can keep harvest high enough? I guess is the strategy, I know why it's there, to keep the buck-to-doe ratio low without increasing the trophy permits, but is there a limit, or do we just keep upping management until success totally tanks?
So the statewide plan puts them at 20% of the total overall permit numbers. And so that's where this number comes from, looking at that 20% threshold. And a lot of times, yeah, that's the point of the management buck tags, is to keep our buck-doe ratio in check.
And that's sustainable at
Yeah.
20%. Okay. We check the age data on those, right? To make sure we're not just killing a bunch of 2-year-olds.
Yeah, we do get age data on those.
Okay. Any other questions from the RAC, from Mike?
Can you just remind us what a management buck is? On those?
Management buck has 3 points on one side. They're more complex than that, Kyle. No, 3 points on one side, or both if you want, but
3 points or less.
or less. Yeah, you can shoot a spike if you want.
All right, any questions from the public on deer permits? All right, let's go to summarize public comment received online for this agenda item, correct?
Yes,
That's-
we received 12 public comments. 50%, half of those comments either somewhat agreed or strongly agreed with the recommendation. 42% somewhat disagreed or strongly disagreed. So kind of split on that scale of 1 to 5, 1 meaning strongly agree, 5 meaning strongly disagree. So the lower score is better, kind of like golf. It came in at a 3 on a scale of 1 to 5, so right in the middle. And I guess just kind of a summary of the comments. Some of the things we heard were some general support for the permit recommendations, some concern about the Pine Valley and Beaver units, and some of these comments probably overlapped the informational item. There were units that were within that 20%, but I think it's probably appropriate to still share those comments. We had comments that folks wanted more bigger bucks, which sounds good. I think we all want more bigger bucks. We had a comment to get rid of limited entry and just go to all general season. Someone asked for more restricted weapon hunts. And we did have a comment or two with concerns about predator management, specifically cougar management. That's kind of the summary of the public comments on that one.
Thank you, Dex. All right, now we will go to public comment on this agenda item only, number 5. First, we'll have Nick Dex. He'll be followed by Andy Monroe. Come on up and say your name, the center microphone, and we'll give you 3 minutes.
Yep. Nick Dax, representing Utah backcountry hunters and anglers. First off, we want to recognize that it can be very difficult to balance your busy day-to-day lives and responsibilities for volunteering on the RAC. So we just want to say thank you. And we also want to say thank you, and we appreciate all the biologists up in Salt Lake that look into this and give us all the figures going forward. And generally, we support the increase in deer permits, though we are a bit curious to know the plans that the DWR has in place, given the drought in that 3-year study. When exactly does that get looked at? Is that year 1? Is it being looked at year 1 and 2? Is it 2 and 3, or just year 3? When exactly that looks like going forward with the recommendations for the drought given going forward. We understand that deer populations are impacted by doe mortality. And we all know that bucks can't grow more deer, so it's all the does. So we understand that. And we are concerned again with the level of snowpack the last 2 years and given the deer herds and seeing where they go within the next upcoming years. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Andy Monroe, be followed by John Bear.
Andy Monroe, I'm representing the Oak Creek Landowners Association, and I just want to address the tag increase on the Oak Creek again this year. I understand that it falls below that 20% tag increase threshold this year, but over the last 10 years, we've gone from 30 tags up to proposed 67 tags this year, not including the landowner tags, which have gone up, and conservation tags. We feel like as a landowner association that this unit it consistently produces trophy bucks, but we're giving more and more tags every year. Thus, the top end on this unit is getting hit harder and harder every year. We would like to see this plan, the mule deer plan, when it's reviewed, hold off on maybe increasing these tags this year and review it next year and see, because if it was put in premium status, there wouldn't be an increase because it would fall between that 40 to 45 bucks per 100 does. And I would just ask that you would recommend to the big game board that they maybe hold off on increasing tags this year. Thanks for allowing me to comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate that. John Bear.
John Bear representing SFW. Andy's a hard act to follow. I've known him. I don't ever remember not knowing him. That's how long I've known him, and appreciate his effort that he puts into the Oak Creek. SFW, for the most part, supports the recommendations for the deer numbers, with one exception, and that would be the Monroe. My good friend Paul Niemeyer brought it to our board, and we're 19 chapters that get together and vote, and they voted to support Mr. Niemeyer and ask that the Monroe be held at 900 permits this year due to the fire and the drought. We know it's below the 20%, but I think considering the rough conditions, it would be worth some discussion. And I know Dax, being the top shelf biologist he is just looking forward to diving into that. So Dax, I look forward to seeing your recommendation on that. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, John. That's all the public comment cards I have on this. Oh, got one more. Thank you, sir. of Robert Ott on agenda item number 5.
Yes, Robert Ott, and representing the Paunsaugunt Landowners Association, we just, what was the basis for moving 10 cactus buck permits over to management buck permits? Our first guess is that probably more deer would be taken, but I'm not sure about that. So that was one question we had. The other question we have, and this is representing the State Limited Entry Landowners Association, is if the permits are increased at the amount they're projected to be increased on the Vernon unit, how many additional permits will landowners receive?
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Let's see if we can get you an answer for that. Mike, can I ask you a couple follow-up questions? After comments, we'll close public comment period. So the West Desert Vernon is proposed to go from 230 permits to 254, or roughly a 10% increase. What does that do? Remind us on the percentage.
I might defer to Darren. Could you look that up, Darren? Might take him a second.
I'll jump to the other question. Paunsaugunt, is it fair to look at that and say cactus bucks were reduced by 10 and management went up by 10, that those are the same permits? Or is it just a reallocation?
No, so the reason the cactus buck permits went down is harvest success has gone down on that cactus buck hunt, and we've heard that it's been harder and more difficult for hunters to find cactus bucks, which is, it's really a success story. I mean, the cactus bucks were a resource that was largely going underutilized, right? So to be at the point where we're having to cut back on those tags, I think is a success story. And then the increase in the management buck tags, Kyle can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's mostly just because we're above the buck-doe ratio objective. During the statewide plan, that was changed. It was 40 to 50 was the objective, and we brought it down to 40 to 45, and it's currently a 46.
To follow up on that, when management tags are increased, does the landowner association receive management tags as well, according to their percentage?
Is that right, Kyle? We give management tags to the landowner? Yeah.
So if the buck to doe is too high, you could either increase the premium tags or you could increase management tags.
Right.
Darren's still working on that. I'll ask another question. Monroe. So help me with this 20% thing, because I feel like I have handcuffs on. So we can't change anything. Nothing is an action item if it falls within a 20% up or down. What if it's no change and the board sees some reason for a change and not make that change? Is that correct?
I mean, ultimately they can. They're the ones that approve the statewide management plan, right? They would just be going against that statewide management plan that they've asked us to manage towards, which is their purview. So there's no legally binding, unless I'm misunderstanding that.
No, are they going against their own plan?
Yes.
They're going against their own plan. Does it have to be an emergency type thing, or?
There's no stipulation on when they should do that or when they shouldn't.
Okay. No, that's a hard question to answer. But Monroe had the fire. How many deer tags are rolling over to this year? Rain checks out of the proposed 1,100. Is it a substantial portion of those?
Yeah, it's 108 permits. So those will be subtracted from that total.
Less than 10%. Right.
Got talking about the Monroe, and I kind of forgot about it, but you said the cactus buck has been a success story having that. Is that because it's taking away from the limited entry pools? Is that why it's a success story? Because now I know it's went way down, and or is it something that could be looked at some other way than having to use limited entry for it?
Yeah, and I think I would call it a success just because folks would spend 25 points to draw a Paunsaugunt tag, and they would get down there and see a cactus buck that looks like it has cow pies on its head. And some of them are really cool, but a lot of them aren't. And so they were a resource that just was going underutilized. And so a few years ago, we started that hunt to try and focus people on hunting those specific bucks.
I guess what I'm saying is maybe it would be something that wouldn't have to use limited entry points. And if we want to get rid of those cactus deer, my wife had the management tag last year and ended up not killing a management deer, not because we didn't have chances, but there were several bucks that didn't qualify as what you'd call a cactus buck, but in all regards, they really were. And I've got pictures to show those, but they really could have been harvested out of that herd as a cactus buck if the rules were a little different. So,
yeah. And when that came through, it was a big debate on what that rule should look like, because it's hard to put a line on what is a cactus buck and what isn't, right? Because sometimes the cactus bucks, everybody's aware this is caused from some type of damage to their testosterone cycle, right? Whether it's their testicles got hung up on a fence, or they had some type of disease event young in their life, and they had fevers that caused some type of damage. That doesn't always mean that they're going to be full velvet. We sometimes have cactus bucks that are still hard-horned, and so we made that decision moving forward because we had to draw a clear line on what was a cactus buck and what wasn't.
Darren, did you have some information on Oak Creek for us?
I can't come up with a number right now, but in general, we do evaluate those annually. And so depending on what the board votes, take into account the number of permits on the unit, and then the LOA will get a proportion based on the amount of property that they own. And then the most recent legislation allows them to have an additional tag. So get one above what the calculation is. So, but I can get it from the spot. We can figure out exactly what we're looking at. But I can't do it.
And Darren, that would lag a year, right? So if they approve the permits now, you calculate a percentage. They've already got their tags for 2026.
So, and we usually do a big evaluation when they're all up for renewal this year. All of that.
Very good. Thank you. All right, any other questions or discussion? Open it up for RAC discussion. Russ?
Well, question I have is on these landowner tags and these areas like the Oak Creek and the Ponsegont, the LOAs, there's a lot of landowners that don't qualify under those that feed a lot of deer. I can give you some examples. I have an 18-acre piece of ground that I've seen over 200 deer on. So my question is, how can we get to a point where you give landowners permits that they can sell to help them feel better or to cover their damages? Where do we have to go to have that conversation? I mean, you know, these guys, I wish we had the same problem, you know, because they can sell those tags for something. I don't know what the numbers are, but.
So you're referring on general season units or limited entry units or both?
General season units.
Okay.
But what I'm proposing, and I don't know that this is the way to do it right here, but somewhere I'd like to have the conversation where a landowner can get a permit based on, and he can sell it or use it or do what he wants with it. He's not restricted. At present time, we're restricted to use them to a family member. We can't sell them. And they're not given to us either. We have to pay for those permits. But a lot of individuals would really like to have the ability to, you know, sell the permit. Some of them don't even have family members that care to hunt, and they're offered a permit. It's really no good to them.
Yeah, so I'm pulling up the rule just to make sure I'm not speaking incorrectly, but they can sell the private lands only permits. It's just the unit-wide permits that they can't sell. Those are the ones that are limited.
But
to
you have
family.
to have 640 acres,
Correct.
contiguous acres to get that permit.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is the guys that don't qualify under your 640 acres. I know a bunch of situations. Guys have thousands of acres and very few deer on them. The guys have smaller acres.
Yep.
And they get no. Am I making any sense?
You do. Yep, you do.
There needs to be something to, balance that out.
Yeah. Yeah. So, because it used to be that either you were in a limited entry unit and you qualified for an LOA. Then we have these general unit permits. But that still doesn't allow you to sell those if they're the unit-wide permits, right? So one of the things that you're going to see coming down the pipeline that they took out a rule that earlier this year is to start a program where we actually enter lease agreements with landowners in a similar situation to what you're talking about. And that's still being piloted, but we're looking forward to having that, because that really the purpose of that is to find those landowners like you're talking about who are very valuable properties for wildlife, but they don't have a lot of options available to them outside of the depredation program, and try to work with those individuals to get them some kind of monetary compensation for what they're doing for deer. So the short answer is it's coming, Russ.
Well, okay, but we're not done with this discussion.
Yeah.
Totally, but for now.
Yeah. Other discussion. All right, I'll entertain a motion on this action item. Thanks, Mike, for your answers and help. Trevor, do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the recommendation as presented.
I have a motion from Trevor to accept as presented. I have a second from Chad. Any discussion needed? All right, all those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Sorry, I thought Brian was about to say something. He kind of looked like he was going to say something, and then he just, so.
All right, let's do that vote again. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion passes 8-1. Bryant would. 7-2, I should say. Bryant, would you like to speak to your no vote?
Well, I'm going to be the black sheep on this, because when this got moved to 20% last year, I think a lot of people knew what it was, and it was to avoid the Southern RAC. That's why that was done. Because the Southern RAC would ask them not to increase tags in our backyard. They would, because they'd get it through Salt Lake anyway. And now, some of those people, and talk about SFW people from Richfield a little bit here, voted for the 15 to 17 bucks per 100 does thing and thought it was great and came and spoke how great it was. Now it's in their backyard on the Monroe and they're asking for it not to be. Well, live in what you asked for. Quality of the deer is going to drop. And we done it on the basis of saying, I think 0.2 does more per 100. If we drop the bucks do increase your deer herds when you don't shoot all the 2 points. You have more deer on the landscape and you have a better product for people to shoot. When you quit using your buck fawns and your 2 points as a reason to increase tags. That's what I hear from the public a lot. You don't see them come to the RAC meetings anymore because of this. And you don't see it online. I don't know how many thousands in the southern region that hunt deer, people that want to hunt here and you don't hear from them. There's a reason for that. And when the RAC started, there was actually a process where it mattered. No longer does the RACs matter. You all probably know that, whether you want to say it or not. We waste our time. A lot of That's
Thanks, Bryant. Russ, did you want to speak to your no vote?
I'm a little the same as Brian. Overall, I just feel like our resources struggling and we're increasing the statewide permits. I don't know what happens in the northern part of the state because I don't go there, but for the Pine Valley and Southwest Desert, which I don't think the Pine Valley didn't get them. But the herds are struggling. This drought's really got them, and so that's I just feel like we kind of are moving a little bit too fast for our resource.
Thanks, Russ. Very fair. Appreciate your comments. All right, that closes agenda item number 5. Give Mike a break and call up Rusty Robinson, our once in a lifetime species coordinator. Talk once in a lifetime permit recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the RAC on this agenda item? This is bison, moose, sheep, and mountain goat across the state. Questions from the RAC? Chris.
Yeah, I'd noticed not so much on permit numbers, but my question would be, for example, on the goats on the Nebo, you're increasing by 6, and but there's no increase in the archery. And I'd like to see something like a 5-1 or a 4-2, or maybe you could address that. And then also in the Book Cliffs bison, same thing. We're increasing permits by quite a few, but not a lot of archery increased permits. So maybe you could address that.
Yeah, those are really good questions and good examples to bring up. I think there's a little bit of, the way that, mountain goats and weapon types and that sort of thing, the way that those permits split out is kind of the prerogative of the biologist. And I think over time we've been beat up a little bit on those archery only permits. And we've kind of been told over the years that, hey, this needs to be a harder hunt or else they're going to go away. And the other thing we hear is we don't need to take permits from the rifle hunters to give to archery hunters. And so part of it probably, to be honest, is kind of a preservation tactic. If we want to keep these hunts around, we have to be careful on how we allocate those and make sure that we're not given a differential disbursement or we hear about it, I guess is what I'm saying. And the success rates, we're told that those need to be hard hunts. They need to be opportunities to get people to the point pool. There need to be lower success rates. And so we've tried to do that, especially with season dates on the mountain goats, and make those really short hunts to make it a hard hunt, and so that somebody with less than max points can put in and acquire that permit and have a hard hunt and make it a hunt. And so you're probably sensing some of that hesitancy. The Book Cliffs, for example, sometimes that archery hunt is more successful than the rifle hunt. You get in there, you get first dibs at those bison. You're still catching a part of the rut, and those archery hunts are pretty successful. So I think the biologists take all that into account, and we kind of like those hunts. A lot of the public like these hunts, and so part of this is we want to keep them around, and we don't want to give them too much, I guess. But we're also open to this is the forum for the public to voice their opinion on that. The public wants to see a different disbursement of those or different allocation of those permits. We're open to it.
Just one other question. So you kind of addressed that the archery goes first in the Book Cliffs, correct? But you have archery go last in the Henrys. Is there, again, kind of a rhyme or reason?
Again, there's a lot of nuance in managing these different bison units, and bison catch on really well to hunting pressure. And if Wade, the biologist, were here, he'd tell you the whole history of that archery hunt. But I think at the time that switch was made, it was felt like that that archery hunt was potentially pushing bison into areas where they were harder to access, potentially pushing them into the park there. And so we decided to switch that to the end and make it a hard hunt and try not to get really close to those bison and push them all around before there's. And I hope I'm representing that accurately. I think that's one of the many reasons. I think there are also other reasons that biologists considered. So those bison units are difficult, and it requires some adaptive management, and it's kind of a moving target because those bison catch on and they start to change behavior, and you kind of have to alter your tactics. Just the nature of
Got a couple questions, Rusty. Explain to me, I mean, I'm in favor of an equal non-resident permit allocation, but the bison, you've kind of lumped book cliffs together to get the 10% or close to 10%, but what about the Henrys? Henrys should be lumped together by itself, correct? All the hunts?
Well, the way we allocated non-resident, the different units that got non-resident permits, we only put one on the book cliffs.
Right.
And if we gave the book cliffs their fair share, it would have been 8 and 8 on that one hunt. We thought residents still need a little bit of an advantage, and so the Henry's got one more non-resident tag than the book cliffs. But all in all, when you look at bison as a whole, it's a true 10% bison.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll ask a question. Do we manage for 100% kill success on once in a lifetime or any legal weapon hunts? Is that our intention?
I don't think that's an intention. I think sometimes that's the expectation.
By division or by hunters?
By hunters.
Okay.
And so I think we're cognizant of that, and we want these to be, high success hunts. We want people to have a positive experience on these. But like we mentioned, those archery permits, those are designed to be a little more difficult and potentially drop the success. But we don't use success rate as a metric. That's not written into our management plans on how we.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, in my opinion, an archery mountain goat hunt is very different than an archery sheep hunt. I think we'll see that in the success. I know why we created the archery sheep hunts. I was in favor of that, but I do question, we got to decide if on sheep, especially, are we managing for 100% success? And if we have a poor success year because who drew the tag or whatever, I want to see those tags get added to the next year. We do this every year, but we don't know how many sheep are out there. You guys do your surveys. That's great. But I want to see as many sheep tags as possible that fall within the management plan and not just say, oh, the wrong guy drew the tag. On to next year. You follow what I'm thinking?
Yeah.
But I would like to see more archery hunts, but I know how that is when you're up against rifle only hunters that have lots of points. They don't want to see them because they want to lose their tags. So we purposely put them in the hard time of year or short season. But I think we should ask the question on once in a lifetime, what are we managing for? And it's such small numbers. It's impossible to say, here's a RAC member and say, I think that should be 3 instead of 2. I can't back that up, right? But I would like to see it managed as strict and as fluid as possible. Any other questions from the RAC? Questions from the public? All right, let's summarize public comment. If we could, Dax.
Hey, we got 2 comments for once in a lifetime recommendations. We got 100% of those comments either somewhat supported or strongly supported the recommendation for a score of 1.5 on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being strongest support. And we didn't get any written comments, just the support or don't support comments.
You good? I have no public comment cards on this agenda item. Guys, with everybody. All right, we'll open it for RAC discussion on this agenda item. Any discussion needed? Once in a lifetime, or once in maybe a lifetime, I should say. Hit your microphone for us there, Chris, if you could.
I say I appreciate your comments. I feel like if we're doing a once in a lifetime hunt, we should be, we're talking about such few numbers. I would think that we would want as close to 100% success rate as we can get. People are putting in and putting a lot of time and a lot of money into pursuing that. And so I think that's important. I agree with what you said on that.
Any other discussion, Brent?
I'll just kind of speak to the Henrys and the buffalo. Archery hunts being in January after all the rifle hunts, it's going to be as hard a hunt as you'll get on probably at that point in the right winter year. And a lot of times probably inaccessible. So that hunt used to be in September and people loved it. Wouldn't be a bad thing to look at moving it back. And somebody draws that, they do expect, and you are right in that, Rusty. They kind of do expect 100%, or at least a chance. Some people will pass that, but they're very few. So maybe make it a little easier on some.
So to be clear, all the season dates were already set. So that's definitely something we want to bring up in the November RAC meetings if we want to adjust the season timing or structure. Sure. Any other discussion?
So Austin, were you alluding to that if a hunter doesn't harvest in the year he has a tag, that there's a way he could hunt the next year? Were you suggesting that, or did I miss?
I wasn't necessarily suggesting anything. I was suggesting that somebody could harvest. So if we are managing, say, for 4 sheep a year to be taken off a herd, if someone doesn't harvest, I want to have to go 5 tags next year to make up for the one that missed. And then it can roll back to 4 the year after, something along those lines. Just unused tags go, sometimes you see on this harvest success, maybe only half the people killed for whatever reason, whether, as long as it's not lack of animals, I would like to see an increase the next year for somebody. Not a rain check for the first guy. Feel bad for him, but. Any other discussion? I will entertain a motion on agenda item number 6.
I'll make a motion to accept as presented.
Motion from Bryant to accept as presented. Do I have a second? Second by Russ. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any opposed? Chad, how do you vote? Favor? And Russ, were you in favor? Okay, passes unanimous, 9-0. Appreciate that. Thanks, Rusty. Appreciate the good work you're doing with sheep and all the other once in a lifetimes that we don't have down here in the south. Agenda item number 7. Let's do this one and then we'll take a short break. Bull elk permit recommendations for 2026. Back with Mike Wardle. Mike, do you have any information for us on this before we ask questions?
I don't. We'll take questions, Mr. Chair.
Questions from the RAC for Mike. Bull elk permit recommendations.
Yeah, I guess I have a question. In this whole process that you've explained to us, I just was wondering, where does the kind of habitat drought conversation come into it? Is it objective set in the management plan, or is it is there 5 years of drought before we change the way that's managed? I'm just wondering because I'm moving so many cows off of the Southwest Desert.
Yep. That's a great question.
The beef kind, sorry.
It's more applicable like in the antlerless permits, but I'll explain it briefly. So each unit, so like the Southwest Desert, the beaver, each unit has a management plan, and we set our population objective there, like specifically for elk, which is probably where you get the most questions. On a lot of our units down here, we actually have a range. So it might look like instead of just 1,200 elk on a unit, it might be 1,000 to 1,500. And during years of drought, we try to manage towards that lower end of the population objective. And when we have better conditions, we try to manage towards that upper end. In scenarios like this year, we made our cow permit recommendations, and then we're going to be watching all summer long. And if the drought continues to be bad and get worse, we can go before the wildlife board in August and add additional permits for next fall.
For this fall.
Yeah, sorry, for this coming fall. Yeah.
So I was also looking at the Southwest Desert numbers, not just on your bull, but you're also increasing cow tags through several different hunts. And it's one unit that, and you just kind of alluded to, it's on the lower end, but it's not even quite up to your 3-year objective number. And so with this drought, why are we increasing permits? It's up to what total, maybe 20 something permits between cow and bull.
Do you want me to address that now or wait till Antlerless? I'm good either way.
No, I'd like you to address it now, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so
Looking at antlerless elk permits on the draw tags, we had 115 last year, and we're actually recommending 112 this year. The population objective for the Southwest Desert is 1,050 to 1,250, and our current estimate is at 975. So again, the biologist, I think, so he still has permits on there because every year there's going to be new calves hitting the ground. And so he's likely trying to make sure that we're not going to all of a sudden jump too high, especially on a drought year like this. We're only 75 elk away from being within that objective. I think rather than cutting tags, especially on a year of drought, he chose just to maintain about the same. Is that fair, Cody?
Good question. Thank you. All right.
Mike, last year we had the legislature sneak a bill into us to where you had to give full elk tax to landowners that didn't have the proper amount of acreage, kind of backdoor that wasn't seen really by anybody. How many have jumped into that now?
I'll probably defer to Darren at the statewide level. The only one I'm aware of personally is on the beaver, but there's probably more. I think there was one on the Southwest Desert too. Two landowners.
That's statewide or just our region?
Statewide.
I'll just follow that up. Is that being looked at, having the legislature change that back some way so that it could be dealt with the way it should be dealt with, or that just who you know kind of thing, I guess?
I mean, I know I'm not, because that's above my head, but I'm not gonna speak for legislators on if they're considering it or not.
There's one sitting right here you can talk to after the meeting.
So I just wondered if you could remind us, so the process on like August hunts, August numbers. So we get to August and we say we're going to up the cow, but we've already had the draw for antlerless permits, haven't we, at that point?
Yeah, I might actually.
So-
Wendy, are you online?
So how do you allocate additional permits after you've already allocated permits once? I don't recall that.
See if Wendy's listening. She could. Wendy's
Do you-
behind the curtain.
I barely hear you, Mike. Can I take this question?
Restate your question, Chuck. She didn't hear you.
So we get a drought year and we add cow tags in August, but we've already drawn for cow tags
Yeah.
earlier.
So-
We do a separate draw? I don't remember.
No, we actually use the alternate list. So those applicants that did apply in June for that particular hunt will use the alternate list to allocate those tags out. We'll email them, let them know that this opportunity came up and if they would like to utilize it or not.
Okay.
That's an answer I should have known, but I'm glad Wendy's
Those,
available.
those opportunities are, it's very important that we can do that and that we give the division flexibility to react. Things are just going to get more and more interesting with the weather and everything else. Any other questions from the RAC? I got a question on the beaver unit. It's no secret that the beaver unit for elk is a little gem down here in this corner of the woods. They know how to grow a lot of elk and a lot of big elk. How is the age objective still so high if there's only 1,000 elk on that mountain and we're only killing 100?
Yeah. I think I've always said with elk, in order to understand what's going on now, you got to look back 6 to 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were above our population objective. We had a lot more elk, which means a lot more calves hitting the ground. And then if you recall in like 2018, 2019, we kind of took the gloves off because we were struggling. We had some big fires, we had the Twitchell fire, and we were really struggling to get those numbers down to the objective. So we kind of took the gloves off and we harvested a lot of cows. And shortly after that is when we saw really high bull cow ratios. We saw success rates drop in our spike elk hunt, which means there just wasn't as many yearling bulls available for a few years, the hunters. And so I think really what we're seeing is we're still cleaning up a lot of those calves that were born, 8 to 12 years ago. Those are still a lot of the bulls that are being harvested. And then we're going to hit a threshold sooner or later on the Beaver East where that age does come down, and we're going to have to probably cut tags at that point, because my guess is there's some of those age cohorts don't have as many bulls on the landscape because we brought the population down and just didn't have as many cows dropping calves.
Thanks. I think what a lot of hunters want to see is not a huge drop off. They want to see you guys get to that objective carefully and let's level it out, and not just, oh no, we shot them all and suddenly there's Wasatch hunt.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Questions for Darren? You had something to share.
2 is in the southern region on those landowner associations. So there's 2 categories. I think the one you're talking about is if they're above 4,000 acres, between 4,000 and then the sort of bottom end of what qualifies for CWMU. So statewide, there's 9 that fall into that larger category. It looks like there's about 29 permits that went.
So there was 9 jumped in on it. And
Yeah.
got
So
bull
2 in the
types that they
southern
could
region.
sell.
Correct. 2 in the southern region, 1 in the central, 2 in the northeast, 1 in the northern, and 3 in the southeast.
And that has no benefit for the public getting any extra tags out of that, correct?
Right. Yeah. Those all go to the landowner.
So Brian, if I could just comment real quick, and I don't mean to be argumentative with you, but that bill wasn't snuck in. I think there was like 6 or 7 drafts. It went to multiple sportsman caucuses. I actually commented in favor of it as a producer. And there was a ton of people commenting on it. So I don't think it was snuck in. And the part that I actually think the benefit, maybe not to the public, is it's pretty hard to tell a guy that has 7,800 acres that they can't qualify, but the guy with 200 more can. 4,000 acres is still pretty high threshold, and that's still a lot of habitat provided for wildlife. So, I mean, we'll have to disagree on that, but I was pretty involved in that bill, and I think it was actually a really good thing.
Thanks, Trevor.
Trevor, I guess my rebuttal to that would be there's a process to get it down to that acreage. It shouldn't be through the legislature. And to the general guy that's not able to go to all those meetings up there because he's working a job, he's never going to know about it.
Thanks, Brian. Questions from the public on bull elk permit recommendations? Do we have any? All right, let's summarize public comment online for bull elk permit recommendations.
We received 7 comments on bull elk recommendations. 72% of the folks that commented either somewhat or strongly agreed. 29% somewhat disagreed or strongly disagreed, for an agreement score of 2.57. So just a little more towards the agree side than the disagree side. Just a summary, kind of generally of what was in the comments. We had a comment to make all the limited entry units general season. We did have one comment asking us to open the general season archery hunt on the Ponsegont unit, which was closed when we first converted the Ponsegont unit into an any bull unit. I think that's probably on Mike's list to tackle with the elk mid-plan review. And then we had some concern expressed about quality on both Southwest Desert and Beaver units. And someone commented that tooth submission should be mandatory for limited entry elk hunters.
Go along with that last comment, is it not?
Tooth submission is not currently mandatory. So harvest reporting is, submission of teeth from harvested limited entry elk is not. Oh,
A packet is sent to everyone.
a packet is sent to everyone, and we actually have pretty good compliance. They're actually similar compliance to teeth submitted from successful hunters versus harvest survey submission.
So the division would say it's high enough to get a good sample. Is that fair? All right, public comment. I have one comment card for agenda item number 7 for John Bear. Come up to the mic.
John Bear representing SFW. We, for the most part, support the recommendations with one exception, and that's the increase on the NEBO. If you look at that increase, that's almost a 40% increase. And the board felt like that was a little on the aggressive side. Most of them felt like maybe keep it the same. I don't know if keeping it the same is an option, but maybe ease into that a little bit instead of a 40% increase. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Any other comments? We got one more from Nick. Thank you, sir.
Nick Dax, representing Utah BHA. We support the recommendations for DWR with bull elk permit recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, no other comment cards. We'll open it up to RAC discussion. I think that the NEBO question needs to be asked. Is it strictly because the age objective is still staying high at 7, and why such a big jump?
Yeah. So yeah, it's over the age objective. If you look at, when you look at like historic numbers on the NEBO, the age objective used to be lower, or higher. It was 6.5 to 7-year-old unit. And then it was lowered actually before the statewide elk committee made changes in 2023. And then since that change, the average age has been 7 or higher in 4 out of those 5 years. And if you look all the way back to like 2010, we had about 1,100 elk there, and we were issuing 140 permits at that time. Now they just flew it, and Wes was well over the objective, over 2,000 elk, and they counted 380 bulls on the flight. So the biologists there felt like we had plenty of bulls. The age is still high. They had a big fire there a few years ago. And there's actually research that shows with elk, when they have a lot of nutrition available to them, they can actually throw more males than females in their calves. And so it's probably expected that we'll have more bulls and a higher bull cow ratio on that unit.
Like, I've never personally hunted the NEBO. What's the expectations on hunter satisfaction if you had that many more permits? Is there plenty of room to hunt, or is it a?
Yeah, it's a pretty big unit, and there's remote areas where folks can get away.
Okay. Thank you. Any other discussion from the RAC on elk? Entertain a motion on this agenda item. We got a motion from Chad to approve as proposed. I have a second. A second by Trevor. All those in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. Motion passes 8-1. Bryant, would you like to speak to your no vote?
My no vote's only, I want to speak to the NEBO. I think that when we jump 40%, that's too big of an increase. And I probably should have jumped in sooner and asked to maybe adjust that a little. Just think maybe 20% would be a better number for that unit for now, and go slower than jump right in.
Thanks, Bryant. All right, that ends agenda item number 7, bull elk permit. Let's take a quick 10-minute break and we will rejoin the meeting here at 7:21. Perfect. Thank you, everybody. Welcome back to the Southern Region Advisory Council meeting here in Southern Utah University in Cedar. We're moving on to agenda item number 8. This is Pronghorn permit recommendations. And presenter on this is Mr. Mike Wardle. Open it up for questions on Pronghorn, Mike. You have anything to share?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add.
Questions from the RAC, Pronghorn hunt. I have a question. I personally was not involved in the Parker Mountain hunt last year, but there was a lot of talk about it last year. How did that go overall? And did we accomplish what we were trying to?
Yeah, overall it went great. I was just actually pulling up the success rates on that hunt. Across all the hunts, they were at 70% success, which is pretty good. Low for that unit. They've had years where they were down in the 40s. But yeah, the last 3 years have been really high success.
And crowding didn't seem to be too big of an issue because the proposal is more tags even.
Right. Morgan, I don't think you got a lot of feedback on crowding, right, from hunters? Yeah.
Good to hear. Any other questions from the RAC? Russ?
Just a general question. How are the wildlife doing with the drought? And we've come off the winter. Are they in okay shape? I know the Pine Valley deer were, the fat levels were really low in your November studies. I'm just curious, how are the herds doing? We're increasing and changing numbers. How are they doing?
That's a good question. It's kind of a mixed bag. If you look specifically at deer, statewide, we actually have really high survival rates this past year. Light winter, that was easy for the deer. But long-term, the drought's scary, right? We've learned, especially down here, that when we have hot, dry summers, they don't put on the fat during the summertime that they need. And then we lose them during the winter, and even during sometimes light winters. But like this winter, if they have this again, maybe we don't need a great summer. Maybe they still do just fine. If we have monsoons, that's a big deal for us down here. They put on a lot of fat during those. If we get good monsoons, they can pile on some fat during the fall. So I guess in answer to the question on deer, good right now, but we don't know what this drought's going to do to them long term. Elk are hardy. Elk really, I was told once when I was going to school that you could grow an elk in a parking lot, and it's got to be a good parking lot, but I think that's kind of accurate. Elk are tough. They're hardy. Their survival is really high. Not a whole lot of concern. Pronghorn, for sure, especially on like the Southwest Desert and the West Desert, it's going to have some impacts if long term. With Pronghorn, it's more in our fawn survival. Is where we see a lot of variability. Our adult survival is typically pretty stable.
Mike, what about the pronghorn populations that we moved recently? How are they doing?
From the Parker?
Yeah.
Good. Again, it's a mixed bag. We had some of those die, which we anticipated from the beginning. When you translocate an animal, it's a stressful event for them, right? And so we did see some mortality post translocation. But after those first initial few months, survival rates actually look pretty good, pretty similar to what we're seeing on the actual unit with a resident pronghorn.
All right. Any questions from the public on pronghorn? All right, summarize public comment from online. This is agenda item number 8.
We only had one comment online. They strongly agreed with the pronghorn recommendation.
Very good. Public comment number 8. We do not have any comment cards on this. Okay. We'll open it up to RAC discussion. What do we need to talk about with pronghorn? Anything? People like pronghorn. Okay. Bart's got something to say. Go ahead, Bart.
Yeah, I was looking at maybe this is better. This should have been a question and not the conversation. But it seems like the management objective to 2 to 3 years is kind of young. I'm not a biologist, put that out front there. But that's just when they're maturing. So it seems like that's a young age to manage to. I was just curious why, I know this is more of the Pronghorn management plan and not the permits, but why do we manage for such a young age?
Yeah, thanks, Bart. That's a great question. So that change came about in 2017 with the statewide management plan. Prior to that, we managed based on buck-doe ratio, kind of like what we do with deer. But then we switched to average age management. And really the big reason was because we realized that we don't need to have 6-year-old, 7-year-old bucks on the landscape. Their horn growth slows down significantly after 3 years old. So most bucks have reached most of their horn potential by that age, by about 3. And so there wasn't a huge reason to keep these bucks on the landscape, until they're 7 or 8. They still have the opportunity to breed. We're still seeing high pregnancy rates. And so it was more or less just to try and allow more hunting opportunity for these species. And I don't know if you noticed in the presentation, there was a slide that showed the number of permits that we've been able to offer since that change. And it's a big deal. We've more than doubled permits since 2017. Got a lot of hunters through.
So, I mean, as a watchable wildlife person, this is, again, we don't manage for herd health, we really just manage for take. And I understand that, but it just seems, just a comment. There's nothing really to answer on that. It just seems we're just managing for take and not for necessarily herd health, because the comments you made really are, hey, we only care about max horn size, and that's it. And if they're not going to grow any much more than that, then we're going to take them off the landscape. And that's a decision the state makes, not you. I understand that. So just my aside or comment on that.
Can I maybe add something to that also? So I appreciate that perspective, Bart, and I apologize if that's how that came off, because we still do preseason classification with Pronghorn, and we're still monitoring that buck-doe ratio. Like, we don't ever want to get to a point where we're harvesting so many bucks that we are affecting herd health. A lot of times with wildlife too, carrying more males on the landscape can actually hurt herd health if you're in a resource limited scenario. So I just want to make that clear that herd health it's a big deal.
I appreciate that, and I'm not trying to dismiss the efforts of the team and and the management they do. So it's just my comments. That's all.
Thanks, Bart. Chuck.
Yeah, I missed this in my notes here. I had a question that I was supposed to ask on Mike, on the Panguitch Zion antelope. We've got a bunch of doe tags that are we seeing a huge increase on that? And can you remind me of the boundaries of that, where that unit is?
Yeah, you're talking doe permits on
Yes.
Panguitch Lake Zion?
Yeah.
Well, maybe let Kyle come up and talk about that, if that's all right.
I'm just not familiar with that one.
So the boundary on that is the Panguitch Lake and Design both combined. So it's just unit wide between both. Yes, you can hunt both sides. That's what it's called, Panguitch Zion. We surveyed last year and we're over objective, kind of like similar to deer. We've been talking. We've had some favorable weather patterns. I mean, we've been dry, but we've had some timely rain. And those pronghorn on the Panguitch, they go really high, like Duck Creek, and they have some high elevation, kind of like similar to the Parker. And we've had some good recruitment. So we're actually over objective. So the permits are to manage with an objective.
Thanks, Kyle. Other discussion? Are we going to entertain a motion on the pronghorn?
I'll make the motion to accept as.
I have a motion by Trevor to accept pronghorn permit recommendations as presented.
I'll second.
Second by Chuck. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
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 All those opposed? Bart, I missed your vote. You raised your hand. Sorry, I just didn't see your hand. It was cut off. Thank you, Bart. All right, motion passes unanimous. As presented. All right, number 9, antlerless permit recommendations. Bring Micah back up one more time.
Yeah, I'm ready for questions.
Talk to us about antlerless. As a reminder, buck to doe ratios and average age of harvested male mainly affects the buck or bull permits, and antlerless gets us to the objective.
Correct.
The overall side. So when drought hits, everything else, it's the antlerless permits.
Yep, we're looking at population objectives, overall population, habitat. In some scenarios, like the antlerless deer permits that you'll see, those aren't necessarily the unit-wide population objective. That's more like, hey, we have a bunch of resident deer in Beaver City or in Oak City, and we're trying to let hunters harvest those instead of just having cars harvest them and trying to manage a local population.
Do you guys have like a sale in Beaver City of plywood for the windows for the archery deer hunt, or is that?
No, but it's a great idea. It's a good fundraiser.
You can shoot a bow in city limits in Beaver?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So we've done this now in Beaver City, Fillmore City, Oak City, and Monticello. Oak City, Fillmore, and Monticello have had quite a few years of it now, and it's honestly had fewer issues than I thought it would. When I first started it in Oak City as the biologist there, I was terrified, and we honestly haven't had that many issues. We did have one arrow in a lady's tire, but the dad paid for the kid's arrow, the tire, and it was solved. So.
All right, questions on the antlerless? I'll ask the question just because I have to every time. How come we can't just do away with antlerless deer public draw hunts in the draw period? What you guys have to do for depredation mitigation is not in the public's eye, but this is, and I hate seeing it every year. How come we still have to do antlerless deer hunts?
Yeah, the struggle becomes, how do we allocate these permits? Like for Oak City, right? We don't really have a great avenue yet for saying we only want Oak City residents to have this tag. And so we put it through the draw, right? In a perfect world, it would be just available to the residents. But we don't really have that tool available yet. Some of these other ones, again, just because they're like, if you look at the Monroe, the Sevier Valley hunt, it's hard to draw the line on who gets those permits and who doesn't, right? For depredation, we have a clear direction of, we give it to landowners, their family, they can sell vouchers. For these other hunts, it's hard to delineate who are these available to. And so we've chosen to try and make them available to any sportsman that can take advantage of those.
And what's the overall harvest success? I mean, my worry when you open up something to a public draw, you get somebody in 3 hours away that's like, I'm going to put my kids in for a doe deer hunt. It should be great. They have no idea what they're getting into.
Yeah, it happens.
Is success good?
Pull up. Do you have one specifically you'd like to know?
Yeah, the southern region ones. Pine Valley, Fillmore, Beaver. Beaver's new, sorry.
Okay. Let's see.
My question is, do you just have to keep increasing permits or to get the harvest you need? I mean, you're talking about 10 does. I feel
No,
like
I think sooner or later you hit a threshold where we can't issue 100 permits on Fillmore City. You know, that's just a recipe for disaster. So looking at Fillmore Oak City last year, we were at 42% success rate. Fillmore City was 25%. The Monroe, I think that's 24. Monroe was low at 14%. The year prior, it was 25%. It's going to vary year to year.
And
what other ones did you say? Pine Valley?
Pine Valley.
Enterprise was 100% success this past year. New Harmony was 50%. And
can I get the names of the hunters that killed?
Yeah. And 90% last year in Enterprise and 100% in New Harmony. So yeah, really high success.
And to be clear, to shoot a bow and arrow now, you have to be how far from a residence that you don't have permission from? Anybody know that
That's a
offhand?
good law enforcement question. I don't know if Brandon wants to jump on that.
Can't shoot off your back porch unless you gave yourself written permission, correct?
So the way that Brandon White, Division of Law Enforcement with the Department of Natural Resources. So the way law is written, it says you have to be 600 feet to discharge a firearm or dangerous weapon. The definite, obviously, an archery equipment is not a firearm, so it doesn't fall under the dangerous weapon thing. And the way the law is written, there's 6 qualifications, and it has to meet all 6 of those qualifications. So, and a lot of them are, what was the purpose that the item was made for? Was it used in a dangerous way? Things along those lines. So typically, a bow could fit the definition of a dangerous weapon if you're shooting it at a person or something along those lines. But in general, we don't interpret an archery equipment to fit the dangerous weapon for this particular type of thing. So there is no distance from a house you don't have permission from. So to discharge a firearm within 600 feet of a house you don't have permission from, you need to have that written permission. But a bow typically wouldn't fall under that same umbrella.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on antlerless?
I have
Yes?
one. So what do you have these doe hunts? What is the criteria you're going by? For example, Enterprise. Austin brought it up for me. Is that doe hunt initiated because of landowners or the city or exactly what?
Yeah, it's a combination of all those things. So it's typically residents in a town, it's landowners, and typically we're putting season dates really early, so like August 1st, mid-September, so that we're focusing on resident deer. We want to make sure that we're protecting migratory deer that might move in later on. So these hunts are usually focused on like resident deer that are in people's backyards, in their fields. So that's the criteria that we're looking at.
I don't like doe hunts, but.
How am I, Mike, how am I, as a RAC member, supposed to explain to a member of the public why the division offers doe hunts for mule deer?
Yeah. One of the things that I think our public has a hard time understanding is that oftentimes a resident deer in town or in somebody's field is never going to be available to a public hunter. Usually they're living their life, 90% of their life on private land. And I look at it as these individual animals are decreasing tolerance for wildlife. I mean, these are the deer that are eating your tomatoes. They're the ones that are eating the tulips. They're the ones that people complain to me about on Sunday, right? And they're decreasing social tolerance for wildlife. If we can manage those localized populations better and keep those at a tolerable level for folks, I think the answer is that we have more support for deer overall that are on the mountain.
Thank you. Are there any questions? We got a question, right?
I guess to that, I still think there's got to be ways you guys could look at going and getting those deer out of those communities and moving them elsewhere without having the type of hunts we're talking about. And I know all the answers, like we can't move them because of disease or this or that, but you could move one same unit to the other end and the disease issue wouldn't be an issue. Some of them die from the stress, I guess. That happens, but in a time we're trying to increase and we're
Yeah. In
doing
a
this.
perfect world, I mean, translocation is a huge tool for wildlife management and increasing populations. And so in a perfect world, we would be able to move these deer, and we did for a long time, right? We had our urban deer program where we were catching deer off the Wasatch Front, moving them, and we stopped them for the reasons that you brought up of we were really concerned about moving chronic wasting disease. There's currently not a live test for chronic wasting disease. So the only way to know if a deer is positive is for that deer to die first, right? Which doesn't help with when you're trying to move that alive. And the other reason is, like you mentioned, a lot of them do die. Over the years, I think we were around 50% mortality. And so it was a lot of time and effort and money for that 50% mortality, which really is a hurdle we can overcome. And And then the other issue would be that if you move them within the same unit, a lot of times they're just right back to where they were. Animals have an incredible sense of knowing where they are. And I wish Dave Smedley was here. He could talk about his master's project where we moved deer from the Parowan front to the Pavant back in the 2000 teens. And we had some does that came all the way back that next year from the Pavant to Parowan front. So there's complications in moving deer.
So I will at least comment, having had dealt with, not in the city, but we've dealt with exactly what Mike's talking about. That I think like what you said, Austin, there is some truth to it where you get somebody from Salt Lake drawn out on a doe hunt. And I think the point is this gives the option for somebody, because if they're a problem deer, that's a resident deer, they can either be removed in a depredation program, which is highly limited to who can do it, or some of the public can have the opportunity to do it, because these deer are not going to leave. I mean, we've done hazing, we've done all that stuff, and heck, the deer will be back in an hour and a half. So I do think that, especially where the stipulations they're making and where it's very limited to really city deer, I think it's actually a wise decision, because the public tolerance really is a big issue. And, you got somebody with a flower garden or a back garden, and they have zero recourse if we don't have something.
Any questions from the public? Comments or questions? Got a question? Come on up, Nick.
Nick Dax, representing myself, I guess. Question is, why was the newly established antlerless cow elk hunt on the Ponsegont created or implemented this year on top of the current one that already exists? Since I believe when I was looking at the objective and the estimated population are identical. Thanks.
Yeah, Kyle, you want to come speak to that?
You can maybe explain the boundary a little too, Kyle, on that new one.
Yeah, so the new hunt on the Ponsegont is to target those elk that are coming into some agriculture fields there in Bryce Canyon. So we have a boundary. I drew a boundary basically to where we're focusing the harvest on those females. We're also doing it early before they start to move. So like I said, there's been a lot of elk that are coming into those agriculture fields, and they'll be laying down bedded at 9:30 in the morning. So and we haven't had a lot of harvest on those late hunts. Those elk will move. So we're doing it early and just focusing the harvest on those elk that are getting ag fields.
Thanks, Kyle. Any other questions? All right, let's summarize public comment. Agenda item number 9.
Okay, online, we had 2 comments. One strongly agreed, one somewhat disagreed. The comments, I guess the narrative of the comments was folks wanted us to find alternatives to doe deer hunts. Some folks said they'd like to see larger elk populations, higher objectives, and there was some concern expressed about late January cow hunts and how those might negatively impact elk.
Thanks, Dex. All right, we'll open it to public comment. I have some public comment cards. First, we'll have Troy Henry. Will be followed by Nick. You want to make a comment as well, correct?
Troy Henry with the Utah Farm Bureau. I don't need to bring up the unprecedented drought that we're going through again, but we're truly in uncharted territory as far as drought goes. We pretty much missed the monsoon season last late summer and fall, and our snowpack this winter was all but non-existent. And we talk a lot about what in wildlife circles, your condition going into the winter or your numbers and survivability. I think we could talk a little bit more a lot of times about the resource, the feed that they're living on that's putting them in that condition. As was alluded to earlier, we've got a lot of Forest Service and BLM permits where if that resource isn't there, if that feed's not there, they'll be coming home, middle of the summer or whenever that's gone. And I'd like to see elk and deer managed in a lot the same way. But at the same time, we appreciate the division's efforts to recognize this and keep their numbers and recommendations on the bottom end of the objective on a year like this. And we'd like to we urge you to support the division's recommendation for the antlerless permits this year. Thanks.
Thanks, Troy. Nick? He'll be followed by John Bear.
Nick Dax, representing Utah BHA. We as an organization support the division's recommendations for the antlerless recommendations. And just want to say thank you for all the hard work that you guys do. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Mr. John Bear?
John Bear, SFW. Our board felt like on the Parker Mountain Antelope 200 might be a better number than 250 for the doe pronghorn. Thank you.
Thanks, John. That's all the public comment cards I have for this. We'll open it back up to RAC discussion. I haven't added up all the Parker Mountain tags. I assume they're all separate hunts. Is it 250? Is that what? That's broken out.
250
Is that right?
total. Yep.
And what was it last year?
Morgan, I think it's the same, right? Morgan?
245?
Yeah, it's 250 last year also.
I only see one different hunt. So if SFW's recommendation was to decrease by 50, then based off of last year and the proposal from this year. Any other discussion?
I keep bringing up the Southwest Desert, but for antlerless elk, again, I know you want to manage to the lower end of the objective because of the drought, but then you also, Mike spoke of the hardiness of elk, so then that keeps me kind of thinking, but they'll also be, I know we've got bad habitat, so we want to be down there because of the drought, but then the elk will also be tied to water resources a lot closer, and I would think that would increase your harvest. So I just see that as a issue.
One discussion I want to just put on the record since I can't make a motion, but I'm all in favor of, we're all going to suffer with the drought, right? The producers are going to suffer. We're going to suffer. The cities are going to, everybody's going to suffer, and we all need to be able to react accordingly. So I would urge the division to use those emergency permit protocols if we need them at any given time. Hunters are willing, and I always encourage the use of hunters over the division employees or aerial gunning or anything else. Use hunters where possible. And if we determine last minute, you need to kill a few extra cow elk or whatever, kill them. That's my opinion. Get rid of them, because we are in a weird stage of aridation, drought, whatever you want to call it. What I've seen done in other states are like hunter population management pools or an opt-in program. You can say, I'm willing, I live in this town. We had a program like that at one time. Do we still?
We do. Like we have our depredation hunts that people can apply for or opt in, and then if we have a depredation hunt or we bring in public hunters to help with a depredation scenario, they're the ones that we would call.
I don't think that's used as often as maybe it could be.
Yeah.
So my example on the doe deer hunts is you're driving around, you got a broken tail light, and you get pulled over every day, and you pay the ticket, and you keep driving around, and you get a ticket the next day. It's like, just fix the tail light. That's what I think with these doe deer hunts. Get rid of them, fix the tail light, fix the black eye going down the road, and use these other depredation pools, call public hunters. Like, we can do a lot of things behind the curtain to call people who live in that city and say, I need you to go shoot this doe. She's got a skid mark on her left side, like she's missing an ear, whatever, and go kill the thing, rather than public draw permits that just look bad for us saying deer herds are down, we have no deer, and we're out there slaughtering moms. So that's my opinion. I'm in favor of killing animals, don't get me wrong. It's not doe deer in the public process. I think it makes us look bad.
I do have one more question for you before you sit down.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I should have asked earlier.
Nope, you're good.
About it. Is there some cities where there's landowner tags and stuff going on where they hold animals back, specifically Alton from migrating? And does that cause problems with the other city people? Because you have a bunch of those staying there before they open up some big tall fence gates to let a lot of your deer herd go ahead and migrate finally?
Kyle, you want to speak to the Alton? You know that better than me.
Like somebody needs to ask these other guys some questions. They're really missing out tonight. So repeat your question so I've got it all the way.
So my understanding is there's some big tall fences down in Alton and they don't open those up because they want to keep the deer there for a longer time. And maybe it's because of landowner tags they have, or because they don't want some of those deer migrating down into the regular hunt. But then I also understand there's residents there that have the deer eating their plants and not much they can do about it. And then after some of those hunts are over, they all of a sudden open those gates to let a couple thousand deer finally migrate that are stuck behind those fences.
Yeah, so
Is
the
that-
town of Alton's fenced, and we actually put through the board a couple of years ago that you can't hunt antlered animals in the fence, so nobody's hunting bucks in the fence. And last year was actually a pretty high year of what deer we get in the fence. There was about 175, so there's not 1,000 deer in the high fence. And we actually open the gates in October as soon as the deer start to migrate, because the only reason we keep the gates closed is just so more deer can't get in. We're just trying to stop deer from getting in. But we opened them, and there was some deer that stayed most of the winter until that snowstorm we got in February, and then they left.
So the fence is there to keep them from getting into town.
Correct.
Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
And
That's
we're-
the understanding I'm trying to get.
Yeah, we're in a better spot right now. The fence is in better shape than it's ever been. So we're hoping to keep a lot more deer out this year.
Thank you.
Chuck?
Yeah, I have one more question for Kyle. I'm just kidding. Just wanted to wait till he got to his chair. No, as the Forest Service rep, I just am really, I'm glad we've put in those objectives that have the range so that we can manage within that range. We're beginning our discussions with permittees, and there's some hard discussions about, what's going to happen this summer if we don't get some rain. And so being able to have that ability to harvest a few more elk is going to be important. So we really support that. So thanks.
The only thing I really got to say is I actually do, because we've had to deal with this, I'm a public lands grazer. We've had to deal with this too, that it's been appreciative to me watching the DWR and the RAC do what they can to stay within these management levels. Even seeing some of the breakdown of these different hunts. I've seen the DWR, it seems that they're doing a lot more of the targeted hunts to deal with the problem wildlife or the problem habitat areas. And so I would just say as an ag guy, I'm pretty appreciative of the recommendations they do have and what the steps they're taking to deal with the problems as they come up.
Any other discussion, or we can entertain a motion? Chuck?
Yeah, I just wanted to, one other thing, I guess this is a question I should have asked earlier about the Monroe unit. We burned about half that unit down last year, and we'll grow a bunch of grass back this year, but not as much as we'd hoped because of our snowpack. And we've added 40 cow tags to that. And there's been a little concern that maybe there should have been more added to that. I know we have that ability to add throughout the summer, but I'm just wondering if there's any. I know they're struggling with how to put fences back up and put cows back up on the mountain. We got whole units, whole allotments that are being shut down or potentially. So there's some real concern with that unit. And so I don't know, maybe this is an attempt to get one more biologist up to the front here. Vance. And his feelings about how we're looking on that.
And I guess why Vance is coming up, I will say that is probably the number one thing I've heard from a lot of our grazers on the Monroe is they are up against, they're up against it real hard right now. And so they're asking exactly that. What is being happened, because what's good for a elk is good for a cow and vice versa. So, I think that's a great question.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And so the Monroe elk herd is right in the middle of its range and its objective. And we issue a lot of cow permits to our landowners that surround the mountain because of agriculture problems. And so generally that unit's really stable. But we did add these 40 permits, which is typically not a hunt we have. And we expect a high harvest of those elk. And if we have depredation problems, then we can add more permits that way. So we thought that was an appropriate response to the troubles on the Monroe due to the fire, and we can definitely add more. We'll keep in good contact with the biologists and range managers on the Monroe if we start to see, negative impacts on the mountain. Then I think we'll take a serious look at that. So, Vance, did you see more cow elk coming down into the fields this winter than previous winters after the burn happened?
Yeah, we've been watching that, and we haven't really seen any kind of increase, kind of the regular amount that we always do.
And on those tags that you issued in the mineral area, I know there's a lot. I know them elk have learned to come down in the middle of the night, and then they'll leave before they can hunt them.
Yeah,
so
smart
have
animals.
they increased that depth, the distance they can go from the landowner property?
Yeah, typically, depending on the landowner and the situation, the field and its proximity to public land, we give a buffer zone. That's what we call it. And that's about 2 miles, depending, but sometimes it might be less than that. And that is usually more than adequate. If the elk are in that area, they'll be within 2 miles of that private property during daylight shooting hours. So that's about as far as we really want to go.
So were they able to harvest most of those then?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say most, but an adequate number. And oftentimes we consider success the elk leaving the area, right? Even if they're not harvested, if they're not damaging crops, it's a success.
Russ?
I have a question. On those buffer zones, is there a way to increase that? And the reason I'm asking that is I have a pet elk herd. When I start shooting, they go to my neighbor that's about 5 miles away. When he shoots, they come back. And then sometimes they go to another guy that's 5 miles away. And I'm like, well, couldn't we integrate those permits so he can help me and I can help him? And I don't know.
Sure.
They're crossing public to get to private, but you see what I'm saying?
I do. Yep. I do. Sometimes we can draw tighter boundaries for like a depredation hunt. Other times we'll issue private lands only permits on a unit, and that solves the issue where you can have a permit that's good for your private ground plus your neighbors plus your other neighbors, and then your neighbor can have those permits too. You can ping pong them back and forth.
They have to be shot on the private.
Correct. Yep. With those.
That's why I said these are smart animals. When they get out in the dark and then they get beyond your boundary, you can't pursue them.
Yeah.
And the same thing with your neighbor. And so then they learn to. So in reality, you don't do much.
It might be a scenario where we need to look at some of the other options. I mean, the 2 mile buffers, we've tried to hold a pretty hard line on that because we don't, in the past when we've gone over that, we really hear it from our public folks that are like, why is this guy shooting an elk 5 miles away that could have been allocated to a public sportsman, right?
Well, I understand that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Russ. Any other questions, discussion? We'll entertain a motion on this agenda item if we're ready. Number 9, antlerless.
We'll make a motion to pass it as is.
We have a motion by Bryant to accept as presented. We have a second.
I'll second it.
Second by Trevor. All those in favor, raise your hand. Say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous, 9-0. Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Hard work. That ends agenda item number 9. Agenda item number 10, CWMU antlerless permit recommendations. with our private lands public wildlife coordinator, Darren Du Bois. Welcome.
You. I don't have anything to add, so I'm happy to take questions.
Questions from the RAC, Mr. Darren, on CWMU hunts. Questions from the public. All right, seeing none, we'll go to summarized public comment, then item number 10.
We had one comment. One person strongly agreed, and they didn't provide a written comment.
Okay. Do I have any public comment cards on this agenda item? No. Yes. Thank you, Darren. Seeing none, we'll take a discussion from the RAC or entertain a motion. A motion by Chad to approve is presented. Agenda item number 10. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Bryant. All those in favor, raise your hand. All right. And Bart, that's unanimous, 9-0. Thank you. All right, last agenda item is number 11, aquatic rule amendments. Randy, welcome, Randy.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening. Before the RAC discusses the DWR's aquatic rule proposal, I briefly want to touch on how we developed this proposal and why the proposed changes are a win for our private aquaculture producers here in the state. We didn't build this proposal in a vacuum. Over the past 6 months, we've been in regular contact with the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food, including 3 separate meetings and multiple phone calls, emails, and text messages. We kept UDAF informed about changes in our rule language as the rule was being developed. UDAF did ask a lot of questions about the process for purging New Zealand mud snails from fish prior to stocking, but any concerns that they had about our actual rule proposal were not expressed during these conversations. In addition, the division presented the rule change to Utah's private fish producers in January to a positive response. We specifically engaged with one fish producer who has New Zealand mud snails. We answered questions that he had and invited him to participate in the development of the rule, but he didn't respond. The DWR also responded to his request to set up meetings for additional discussions, but he never responded to confirm dates. Ultimately, the goal of this proposal is to balance industry needs with the protection of Utah's fisheries. Right now, New Zealand mud snails are a major threat. They reproduce asexually, so it only takes one stray snail to start a new population. Currently, if a hatchery has these snails, they have to purge every single load of fish before stocking, and that process is labor intensive. Our proposal moves us to a common sense, case-by-case approach that we feel provides additional opportunities for the private aquaculture industry while protecting our native wildlife resources. In the vast majority of cases under our proposal, we'd allow stocking without purging. We'd only require in situations where the stocking could potentially impact native spring snails. Under this proposal, there are situations where we may deny a certificate of registration request, but those situations be very rare and they'd be limited to scenarios where stocking pose an extremely high risk to our native spring snail populations. Our proposal provides critical mechanisms that will protect our native spring snails, many of which have been petitioned for listing under the Endangered Species Act. The main reason why native spring snails have not been listed is because there are safeguards in place that prevent New Zealand mud snails from invading their habitat. Our proposal keeps the essential safeguards in place, which should help prevent a federal listing. If native spring snails were to be listed, it would be a regulatory nightmare for private growers and landowners, and a federal listing could also impact our public fisheries. The proposal also helps open doors. Arizona has restricted the import of fish from growers that have New Zealand mud snails, but Arizona has indicated they're willing to adopt regulations similar to what we're proposing tonight. This paves the way for our local producers to get back into that market. It should be noted that under our proposal, all stocking by the growers that have New Zealand mud snails would require a certificate of registration. The pond owners themselves request these certificates of registration, so this proposal does not add burden to the fish grower. The bottom line is that our proposal would allow private fish growers that have New Zealand mud snails to avoid the labor-intensive purging process for the majority of their sales in the state, while maintaining safeguards that protect Utah's native spring snails. Lastly, we are proposing one additional amendment to Administrative Rule R657-3C subsection 9 that is not in the RAC packet. Currently, as proposed, the rule would prohibit any water discharge from facilities that hold fish. However, this requirement is technically impractical as most hatcheries and ponds are designed to discharge water as a standard part of their operation. To address this, we propose updating the language for subsection 9, part 3B to state, all effluent from holding tanks must be managed to eliminate the potential for discharge into public waters. Private ponds, licensed aquaculture facilities, and licensed fee fishing facilities are exempt from this requirement. Thanks for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions you have tonight.
Thanks, Randy. Any questions for Randy? Art, go ahead.
I was wondering if you could you go over what protections you're actually taking? All I saw was the COR as a requirement for fisheries that, or private fish growers that had the New Zealand mud snail. And there are numerous statements of the protective measures that are taken, but in the RAC packet and in the video, the only thing that I heard was the certificate of the COR. So what other measures are being taken to prevent introduction of the mud snail to these private ponds, which when you look on the map that was provided, they're pretty much all along, it seems that this pretty much north to south on the state. And I just didn't see that. I want to know, what are we doing actually to prevent introduction?
Yeah.
Seems like, yeah. And I have a follow on, but please answer that first.
Okay, yeah, there's a few things that we're doing here. I think first, we're primarily interested in native spring snail populations and trying to prevent New Zealand mud snails from invading their habitat. And where the certificate of registration process plays a role in this is it allows us really on a case-by-case basis to look at where somebody would like to stock fish into a pond, so where that privately owned pond is situated, and look at where that sits in proximity to native spring snail populations, and then make a decision on what that risk is to that native spring snail population. So our intent is that, if somebody's trying to stock fish from a New Zealand mud snail positive hatchery into a pond that has native spring snails, or maybe is adjacent to a native spring snail population, we see a high potential for invasion of New Zealand mud snails into that native spring snail population. In those cases, we wouldn't issue a COR. But if there's certain separation and we don't see a risk, for example, there's not a native spring snail population in near proximity, we would go ahead and issue that COR.
But what is that proximity? What does that look like? Because, I've done a lot of work with endangered species, and as I'm sure you have, and it's great now, and it seems like we're trying to loosen the regulations for hatcheries, but as soon as there's a problem, it's a real problem. And
sorry, it is a real problem, and it's a concern we've got. Certainly listing petitions for these native spring snails in the past have specifically identified New Zealand mud snails as a potential risk to them. It is a little bit difficult to put specific criteria in place on how close we would allow fish from a hatchery with New Zealand mud snails to be stocked to a native spring snail population. It really depends from a situational basis. So it depends on, not just the distance separation, but how connected it is hydrologically, whether it's upstream, downstream, what barriers are in place. And there's even a role for the size of the pond and potentially how much waterfowl traffic and cattle traffic maybe goes through that pond. So it puts us in a position where it's hard for us to put like a hard, fast rule in place, but we feel like it's better for us to look at it on a situational basis and kind of consider all those factors that I listed and make a decision based off of that.
so will these mud snails, do they affix to the bottom of boat hulls? If someone has a private, their little canoe, they're moving back and forth. So is that a method of transport?
I haven't heard about that as a method of transport for these. They don't have the same, they're called bissel threads that like zebra mussels have that allow them to physically attach to the hull of a boat. These are more just suction as a snail and they fall off pretty readily. So I think that is unlikely as a vector. I think what you see more often as vectors is certainly fish stocking is a potential vector. We've got certainly situations where people with their waders, for example, they've trudged around and they got the snails stuck with mud and stuff in their waders, and they go from one water body to another water body and the snails fall off. That's been the vector, and there's some evidence out there that waterfowl and cattle movement are also vectors.
Do you have, I didn't see any, but do you have any mechanisms to remove this? So say we approve, say this is approved, but you start to see introduction of New Zealand mud snail into Utah spring snail ponds. Will you be able to stop this, or do we have to go through the whole RAC process again to try to stop it?
I think certainly if we saw it, probably our initial reaction would be to be very cautious on issuing additional certificates of registration. Probably would have to go back through the RAC process to maybe redefine what that rule looks like moving forward. But I'm pretty confident that given the locations where we have these native spring snails across the state and kind of their proximity to private fish ponds, in a lot of ways, there's not a lot of overlap between them, that I think we will be effective at keeping them out through this process.
Thank you.
Other questions, Chuck?
No, that's what I was going to ask. So thanks.
All right, Rachel?
Yeah, so you mentioned that Arizona is kind of like watching to see how it works. Are we the guinea pigs on this approach, or is there other states that have tried it?
I think in this case, we're kind of taking the lead on the West on a rule change for this. And I think some of it is we've got a private grower that has New Zealand mud snails who has interest in stocking here in the state, but a significant part of his clientele is in Arizona as well. So I think that's why they're kind of watching us in this case, because, we're looking at opportunities for private growers to stock, and this particular grower also has a lot of business that they take down to Arizona.
Any questions from the public? All right, thanks, Randy. Do we have public comment from online?
We had one public comment. They didn't provide a written comment, but they strongly agreed with the recommendation.
Perfect. Don't have any public comments from here in the room. I'll open it up for RAC discussion, or we could entertain a motion. Good.
I just encourage you to be really careful. I mean, we have several spring snail populations on our forests, and we've protected them for a long time, and we'd like to see them. Sounds like you've got the right path forward, but just be cautious.
Motion? I felt like I was watching National Geographic learning about snails. I didn't know about these things. But... Bart?
So I know majority of the RAC is in the Wildlife Board is about managing, wildlife take and permits and things like that. But it almost seems that there's a lot of zeal to, support hatcheries at the expense of native this potentially endangered population. And we want to be at the edge of the curve on this. But if we mess it up, we're going to actually do a lot of damage. And as you said, as was said earlier, we're going to invite a lot of regulatory scrutiny and regulatory hurdles we have to go on. It just, I don't know, it just seems a little bit, I want to say cavalier. I know you're not being cavalier about it, but it just seems like, does anyone else see risk in this on the RAC, or is it just me?
I actually agree with you, Bart. I don't see the benefit here for the risk that it's being exposed. And it seems like you're benefiting one grower at the risk of the public, and I don't understand that.
Any other discussion, or would someone like to make a motion?
I'm old enough to remember when the whirling disease got a little out of control and was traced back to a private hatchery. And so I'm also a little on the cautious side on this.
I have one more thing. We used to have the amber snail was listed, and that affected what we could do at at Best Friends Animal Society. We had basically ponds and areas around the ponds that you couldn't do anything at because of the listed species. They've since been delisted because of various reasons, but when you have listing, it's going to be a problem for a lot of private landowners. And I'm concerned about it.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment to comment on all this. And I hear exactly all the concerns that people are raising here. And certainly protecting our native spring snail populations is of utmost importance to us. The reality also on the landscape is that, yes, I mean, we do have a lot of spring snail populations, and a lot of them are centered in this part of the state. We also have parts of the state that don't have native spring snail populations. And some of those parts of the state don't have suitable habitat, honestly, for New Zealand mud snails either. And that puts in a position where we feel like there's opportunities for us to provide opportunities for stocking. And it's not just from private growers, it's from state hatcheries, federal hatcheries as well, to support our sportsmen across the state. It's because some of these hatcheries as well have New Zealand mud snails, and to allow them to carry out their stocking in situations where there truly is low risk. There's significant separation, talking 50, 100 plus miles to the nearest spring snail population in areas where New Zealand mud snails have zero to very little chance of actually surviving. And I think those are the situations that we're trying to create here. We're not advocating at all trying to stock fish from a New Zealand mud snail positive hatchery in very close proximity to a native spring snail population. We want to protect those populations, but again, those opportunities across the state where there isn't a native spring snail population remotely close, where we could create some additional opportunities, again, for private growers, but also this affects state and federal hatcheries.
It seems that that's a reasonable position, but the controls aren't in place. It doesn't seem like there's enough controls. It's not expressed that it's rigorous. Then I just doesn't make sense to me, but I will stop so we can move forward.
Thanks, Bart, for your comments. Trevor?
So the only comment I'd make on this is I think that there is a lot of caution. I think this is why the gentleman explained the process they went through to make this happen. And I do think we need to remember when we talk about one grower, when we're talking about fisheries, there's not a lot of growers in the state of Utah. So one could be a good portion of the growers that there is. It's not like saying one cattleman said this, so we're doing it. In our industry, with agricultural production, we've been beat to death with the what if. What if this happened? What if that happened? What if this endangered species, did this? So then we get that stick's been used to beat us for 50 years. I think the DWR, I went to a presentation at the water users thing put on by Kevin Bunnell. And I think the DWRs demonstrated over and over and over again what they have done to keep us from getting endangered species listings, protected species listings. And if they've went through a rigorous process to do this, we got to trust the guys that do this for a living. So to me, I would support going ahead and doing this. And like the gentleman said, is that if we run into a problem, we can deal with it. So I would support this language.
Sure. Anybody like to make a motion? Trevor?
I'll make the motion to accept the language as presented.
I think we would need to put in there to accept subsection 9 amendment as well, as it was stated, if we want to accept that.
What you said.
Okay, got a motion for Trevor. Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
A second. All right.
So just to be clear, the motion is to accept as presented with the addition of that additional language in subsection 9.
Part 3B.
Yes. including an exemption for, in some situations, for discharge.
All right, got a motion by Trevor, a second by Chris. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. Aye. All those opposed.
Nate,
All right, motion passes 7-2. Sorry, 6-3. I know how to count, just not very well. Would those that voted against like to speak to why any more than you already have? No? Rachel?
What's been stated before, I don't see, I see the risk is higher than the benefit.
Okay. Same with you, Bart?
Yep.
I appreciate you guys speaking to your understanding and sharing those comments. It helps us out. Okay, that ends agenda item number 11, which is our last agenda item. So a couple housekeeping announcements. I'm told the elk plan or the elk management plan mid-plan review will be this summer. Is that correct? And then that'll get brought up this fall for RAC meetings. So that's a mid-plan review when some changes could happen, some adjustments and tweaks. So definitely keep your eye on that as that committee convenes. This board meeting will be next Thursday up in Farmington Bay, April 30th. The board meeting to make final decisions on all of this. And then the next RAC meeting for the Southern region will be May 19th in Richfield. So just less than a month away. We'll see you all again up in the chosen land, as Frank called it, right? Yeah, okay. I think that's it for today's RAC meeting. Thank you everybody for attending, and meeting is adjourned.